All right, now let's speak to the Independent Investigative Directorate. They say that the 3 officers are facing 3 charges after a case was opened against them last night. IPID spokesperson Robbie Raburabu joins us now for more on that. Ms. Raburabu, good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on In Focus tonight. Firstly, I heard you mention earlier on in another interview earlier in the week that IPID would not have been able to continue at least with the criminal investigation if charges were not laid, and you were saying you're still in search of the victims for them to furnish you with statements and for them to open the charge. Can you confirm that the charge has now been laid by all, or at least cases being opened by all 3 of the victims, or is there more to that number?
Good evening. Yes, the investigators have yesterday interviewed all 3 victims, and they have obtained statement from them. At the same time, last night they proceeded to the Sandton police station where some charges were laid against the police officers. We're talking about assault GPH, malicious damage to property in respect of the vehicle that was damaged, and the pointing of firearm. So there are 3 counts of assault because there are 3 victims that have been assaulted in this instance.
Right. In terms of the pointing of rifles, is that a charge of intimidation?
According to the statements, these guys, when they were forcing them off the road, they were pointing firearms at them for them to force them to stop.
And now there were 4 people, I'm assuming here, because there is a lady that is appearing in that video. Did she lay any charges?
The lady was not in any way assaulted by them, according to her, but she was equally traumatized by the incident.
And now,
so there are no charges that have been laid by against the police officers.
Right. There is a use of firearms. There's a use of force in terms of the protection services in carrying out their jobs in some instances where they would push probably people who could be entering into their secure zone and so on and so forth. So what determines the measure in which you use to say this was now an assault on the individual?
In this particular case, it was a clear assault where you saw them trampling on these victims. So it's not like when they were just forced off the road and they were left there. So this is a clear assault that happened, that everyone saw it happening on these poor victims.
And in terms of the investigation then of IPID, because you would be looking at the police officers themselves making representations as to explaining their actions. And speaking from a conversation that I had with one of the legal experts saying the only defense they possibly could be putting up is the defense of the endangerment that could have been posed to their principal. Is that something that IPID would need to consider in their interpretation of the events?
It's possible, but that they would have to actually give as a defense, and that would only happen in court. But for us, what we are looking at is, remember, with us, they don't have to say anything. All we have to do is just to ask them to tell us what happened. If they want to say whatever that they have, but whatever they say, it does not have to be taken seriously until they go to court themselves.
Yeah. Speaking of going to court, people have been questioning why the officers have not been arrested. We hear that they've been suspended, or at least they've been served letters to furnish why they shouldn't be suspended from their posts. But why have they been not arrested? If I would have been charged with an assault, I'm sure I would be spending the night at least behind bars and make an application for bail.
I think we also have to be fair because as an assault, you first have to investigate before you assault anyone. With an injury, the case has been laid, and now that the case has been laid, is then depending on the evidence that is there and the amount of the injuries that have been sustained by the victims, and then we on that basis we can decide as to whether we want to arrest these people immediately or not.
Yeah, but with your own statement, you're saying it's very clear from that video that it's an assault. So what else do you need before you make a decision to arrest?
Hence, I'm saying the investigation started yesterday. So between now and probably next week, that decision would have to be done.
And at this particular point, are you certain as to how many officers were involved?
Not at this stage, because remember, as I said, we have charges ranging from assault to pointing of firearm. Remember, there were more than 4 members that took part in the assault. So the others might appear on the other charges, but they might not be there on the other charges.
And at this particular,
so you have to be selective when charging them.
Right. And at this particular stage, then, the charge of damage to property, what is the extent of the damage? Because we are hearing, at least from the South African Policing Union, that there was an attempt to break the windows of the car. What's the extent of the damage?
The window of the car has been broken, but then also the vehicle itself is damaged by the actions of these police officers. So that also, there might be not all of them that actually did that. There might be others that actually contributed to the damage. Maybe others might not have been involved in it.
So there could be challenges, Mr. Raburabu, as far as the chain of evidence is concerned, because right up until this matter was put on social media, I suppose no case was opened, and from the Deputy President, we're hearing that this incident took place at the weekend. Do you see that being a challenge to your work?
Not at all. It does not necessarily matter when it happened. As long as the case was eventually opened, we can still go ahead.
And you are certain that you would have solid evidence, and none of it would be, I suppose, challenged in when this matter finally gets to court?
I don't think so. I don't think anything will be challenged.
This particular matter of the VIP protection services, is it something that IPID has seen quite a number of these cases that you've had to investigate, or is this a unique kind of situation?
We don't investigate a lot of these things. Even if they happen very sporadically. So it's not something that we used to see. But to us, an investigation of this sort is not the first time that we actually come across. So it might not have been the VIP, but we have other police officers that are behaving like this one or even worse. Yeah.
And that's the question that I wanted to put to you, that they are raising the question of misconduct of police officers, at least in the last 5 years, and the amount that the SAPS is having to pay to victims, for example, who are assaulted and so on, that number rising. In your view, is this a general posture of misconduct that you are having to deal with that would be related to the number of those cases rising and the number of cases going to court and victims being successful in getting compensation?
We are not privy to that information of the liability that the minister might have on as a result of this assault. But from our side, every case that ends up going to court or end up going to the prosecutors for decision, we submit with them with the recommendations for disciplinary. So which means once we do that, it means we feel that there's a case for the police to answer. So if anything goes according to the number of cases that we do, and we think that the liability would be actually a huge number that the minister has to pay.
And how will you then explain the fact that this number is rising, even though you're saying you're investigating them and certainly in some instances you're successful? Why is it that we are seeing the number rising, at least in the last 5 years?
From IPID side, I think what is obvious is that the disciplinary, because remember the employer has to actually deal with these matters as and when they happen. But from IPID side, we feel that there's a number of cases where we could have expected harsher sanction with regard to when they are found guilty. But there are very few of them that ends up with a harsher sentence when we expect. An example would be that the matter of Mdluli, if you remember, the vet student that was killed some time ago, where even though the court itself dismissed the matter because of other reasons, but then the disciplinary found these guys were responsible. And their behavior actually led to the death of a human being. But when you look at the sanction thereof, it's laughable. It's really laughable.
So what happens at this particular point? I mean, you are now taking charge of this investigation. You're confirmed that you've spoken to the members. The National Police Commissioner announced earlier in the week that they, as the South African Police Service, are conducting their own internal disciplinary processes, which I'm presuming will also require them to be in touch with these witnesses. But I also hear now, from what I'm reading, that you, as IPID, have advised them to refrain from engaging with any police officers. So how are these two processes going to run parallel to one another? The processes we first give a chance to the criminal investigation, and once we are done with the criminal investigation, is then that we make disciplinary recommendations to SAPS. But if nothing stops them also from continuing on their side, as long as continuing on their side does not necessarily mean that when we make our own recommendation, our own recommendations are just only going to be academic, because they would have been embarked on a process whereby they would actually maybe mete out a lenient sanction after they have done that. Even though legally there's nothing that we can do, but we are worried about that, because that's what makes these people to actually continue unabated with regard to the behavior of actually assaulting people. Yeah. So, I mean, are you saying there is then a chance that they could be interfering with the victims who are also witnesses in this matter while the criminal investigation is continuing, if we are to assume that these processes are running parallel? Because already they have issued letters intending to suspend the officers, saying, give us reasons why. And I would assume that before they are suspended, they would then need to have satisfied themselves, gathered evidence to say we are actually carrying out the right action.
More often than ever, in their disciplinary processes, they would need the same witnesses that we are using for criminal investigation. Then they would have to have investigators. But then it's risky to use the same witnesses in a departmentally disciplinary investigation or hearing when they have not testified criminally. So it's better to deal with the criminal process first before we even go there. So which is why we normally do not like to proceed with disciplinary processes before the criminal process is done by. Even though the process themselves, they are two different processes, and none doesn't have to depend on the other.
I assume that assault, GBH, and brandishing a firearm and damage to property is the same charge that applies to civilians as it applies to police officers. But I suppose there's an added burden on police officers on whether or not having that kind of a charge would still allow them to continue to operate as police officers.
Normally, they are what the police call precautionary suspensions, and there are those what they call precautionary transfers, where a person would be moved from where he normally performs his duties to another environment where he's not going to be subjected to maybe seeing the members of the public or deal with members of the public. So there are other things that the police management can do rather than immediately embark on a disciplinary process if they don't have enough evidence to can actually continue with it.
But if indeed it is proven and there is enough evidence, what would an assault charge of this nature carry as a sanction in terms of jail time?
Oh, that's difficult for me to say because that's up to the court. So I can't necessarily say so because it depends on the magnitude of the assault and the evidence that was led in court. That depends on the court altogether. I cannot actually even attempt to actually say what it would be.
But does IPID generally push for jail time, especially in instances where life is lost?
Yeah, that's the work of the prosecutor in court, not IPID.
All right.
All we do is to investigate.
All you do is investigate. Mr. Raburabu, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on. That is the IPID spokesperson there, Robbie Raburabu, on the work that they are doing and where they are right now as far as that investigation and this matter is concerned.